very much for your support. It really does mean a lot that the teachers can share with you all the things that they're doing with your daughters at school and give you some ideas of A, how we do things at school and why we do things in a certain way, but also hopefully give you some really useful resources and some understanding of how we can support at home. So thank you once again. As always, there's always an opportunity at any point during the school term for you to contact teachers if you have any questions about things that your daughters are learning in class, or you want a little bit of clarification about something that they're doing. And as I always say, we do have our open door policy, so please do come and ask those questions. And I know the teachers are always very happy to meet with you and talk through anything that you might be unsure about or want a little bit of advice about, or just a bit more information about how your daughter is doing. So this morning we're starting off with our English workshop, and then we'll be moving on to the maths. So I think it remains to say hand over to Mrs. Gonja and Mrs. Neil, who oversee English within the school, and I will leave it there.
Very much. Okay, this is being recorded, so I'm going to ask you the microphone. Just so if you can't attend, you can see this on MIS at some point. Yes, thank you so much for coming. I am Mrs. Bolliger. We'll be back in just a moment. We look at English for Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. Just wanted to start off with a little poem about the English language, not the whole poem, a bit of a separate poem, but just to get us thinking about how difficult the English language is. So have a go at reading it out in your table groups, taking turns to read a verse or a stanza. Just see how you get on, and then we'll have a little chat about it in a moment. Okay, so I'm not going to ask anyone to read it out unless there's a willing volunteer who would like to. But it just shows how tricky our language is. You've got letter strings with the same letters, but they make completely different sounds. And this is just highlights what our children are grappling with every day when they're doing their reading. For example, it's not in this particular poem, but O-U-G-H. We have through, we have rough, we have bow, all the same letter string, but completely different sounds. So yeah, the joys of the English language there for you. So, reading at school. This is what we would expect a child to know by the end of year 6. So this is where we are aiming to get your daughters. Obviously every child has their own learning journey, they will progress at their own pace, and groups will be put in place in order to get them to get as much out of their learning journey as they possibly can to do the best that they can do. But there's such a range from being able to read aloud with appropriate intonation, thinking about how characters are feeling, what they're thinking, their motives, looking at mood and atmosphere in a piece of writing and picking out authors' language choices and how that is created through the words that they have used, thinking about audience and purpose, why are you writing this piece of writing, who's it going to, who's it for, commenting on figurative language, which they do more in 5 and 6, and then being able to justify their responses using evidence from the text, and not plucking things out of thin air, not looking out the window and thinking, oh, what should I choose to say today, but actually taking it from the text and using that as the basis for their answer.
So, sorry about my late arrival with the technology. So, Our big focus here is making lifelong readers. So we need to teach them to read, we need to teach them all those skills, but we also need to teach them to love reading. So this is our mission statement for reading, to foster a love of reading for pleasure across the school. We hope that pupils will be independent and reflective readers who can read fluently and for meaning. So it's not just about the skills, it's about the love. So it's a real balance between, yes, we need you to learn how to do this, and we need you to read some complex texts so that you get that vocabulary, but we also really, really want you to love reading. Because we know the draw of screens and everything that's out there, you know, waiting for them when they get their phones and going to high school is going to be really hard to manage. So we want to really instill that love of reading straight away. This is a quote from the National Literacy Trust. There can be few things as powerful as regularly reading to a young child. It has astonishing benefits for children: comfort and reassurance, confidence and security, relaxation, happiness and fun. And I know that when the children are little, we do a lot of reading with them. We spend that really important time with them, bedtime stories. And as they get older, they pull away from us a little bit, but it's really important to keep up that connection, and it can be a really lovely experience reading with your children, as well as something that's really useful for them in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, and just to add to that, obviously in Key Stage 1, maybe still in Year 3, they are on our school reading scheme, but when they come off that, they become independent learners, but that means then doesn't mean they're left on their own. We do still check in with them, making sure that what they're reading is appropriate. We have discussions around their reading journals, talking about what they're reading, what they like to read. So when they become independent, they are not left on their own. They are still checked in with, just to make sure that they are where they need to be. So a lot of our reading work in lessons is based around the reading skills, and we base these reading skills on what we call the Forcing Pals or the Forcing Gang, which follow on from Key Stage 1. So if you're in the Key Stage 1 workshop, some of these guys will be familiar to you. So we've got Victor vocabulary, so he looks at the word choices that an author has made. Rex Retriever, that is your literal questions, you will literally find the answer there in the text. Summary, they actually find summarising quite tricky, so really good skill if you are reading with them. Read a page or read a chapter, can you summarise for me the main points that have happened? And they find that quite difficult, just to get the main points. I don't want to hear the whole story, I just want those main points. Inference Iggy, he's looking for clues in the text. I often use the example, Mrs. Gollinger stormed into the room. Okay, how is Mrs. Gollinger feeling? Yeah, she might be angry, she might be frustrated. I haven't told you that, but using the clues, you have inferred that. Predicting, really good one to use when you're reading with them. Stop, what do you think is going to happen next? What's going to happen to that character? And then these last two are more Year 5 and 6, so commenting, thinking about why an author has made specific choices, and being able to explain those. And particularly this one, if they can start to understand why an author is doing something, they can then feed that into their own writing, and that's where you're seeing that they're basing the craft of their writing on the authors that they enjoy reading.
So hopefully when they come into Year 3 and 4, they have already done the groundwork of learning to read. There are some girls that still need help with phonics when they come to Year 3, and that is in place for them as well. But generally, by the time they're 3 and 4, they're ready to go, they've done loads of work in Key Stage 1, and we start working, well, we continue working on their fluency, and fluency brings together a whole range of things. So it's the accuracy of word decoding, it's the recognising words without having to read them letter by letter, and it's how you read, it's the expression and the rhythm of your reading as well, and those come together to give you that pace, to give you the expression that helps you read for meaning, and also helps you to read to other people for meaning. And we find a lot of the girls, they may be able to read all those words, but they need some help with fluency. So throughout the school we have fluency groups working on those skills, going back, rereading, getting that pace going, to help them build that fluency. Because if they're not fluent readers, they can't understand what they're reading. If they're reading too slowly and they're reading word by word, they can't really take in the whole sense of the sentence. So it's really important we get that fluency going. And at the bottom there it says, without a solid foundation, a building cannot stand. And reading fluency is that solid foundation that we need before we can go on to build on all those other skills, because they cannot take in what they're reading unless they are fluent. We have lots of skills that we use when we're practicing fluency, and the girls quite like it because there's a lot of drama involved. So we thought we'd get you to try it. So we have a passage here that we actually use with Year 4 from a really beautiful picture book called Firebird. It's a beautiful Russian story. And we do some choral reading with the children with this in Year 4. So this is one of our techniques. So we're going to listen to the story first, and then we're going to read some parts of it all together, and then you're going to practice with your partner. And these are the sorts of things we would do to try and get that fluency going for girls who don't necessarily get that expression. So yes, we are going to put you on the spot, and you are going to have to do it yourself. I'm actually take the copy as well. Excuse my croaky voice, I have the lady that everybody else seems to have. So, here is the page. In the shadow of King Vaslav's palace was a marvellous garden, and in the middle of that garden stood a tree. On it grew golden-skinned apples, each one dazzling as the sun. Walking in his garden one evening, King Vaslav noticed that some of his apples were missing. "Guards! Someone is stealing my treasured fruit," declared the king. Who could the culprit be? "Sire," said the old gardener, "the thief is not a person, but a magnificent bird with feathers of fire. Every night it comes swooping down out of the sky and eats a golden apple." So here is where you're going to come in. So I'm going to read a sentence, and you're going to read it back to me. Okay? You're going to repeat it back to me. And you're going to try and repeat it back to me how I'm saying it to you. We might change it up a bit as we go along. In the garden of King Vaslav's palace was a marvellous garden, and in the middle of that garden stood a tree. To you.
In the shadow of King Vaslav's palace was a marvellous garden, and in the middle of that garden stood a tree.
Lovely. Well done. Which word did you put quite a lot of emphasis on there? What did you find? Marvellous. Who would like to have a go at saying marvellous, really emphasising that word? Come on, who's brave? Who's going to have a go? Well, let's hear you all. Go on. Marvellous. Marvellous. Good, well done. So these are things, making sure that they recognise why they might be emphasising certain words. So that we might talk about the fact that that's an adjective and why it's important that it's a marvellous garden. Why is the author picking out that detail about the garden? On it grew golden-skinned apples, each one as dazzling as the sun. And I slowed down a bit there when I said each one as dazzling, because I wanted to really zone in on why we were describing it like that, to really get the specialness of those apples. So let's try it together. On it grew golden-skinned apples, each one as dazzling as the sun. And I'm going to skip down to the speech now, because I want to think about how we could say things in different ways. So, first of all, I'm going to make the king quite angry. "Guards! Someone is stealing my treasured fruit," declared the king. Let's hear it from you.
"Guards! Someone is stealing my treasured fruit," declared the king.
Good. Or we could do it a bit more puzzled, couldn't we? "Guards! Someone is stealing my treasured fruit," declared the king. Try it like that.
"Guards! Someone is stealing my treasured fruit," declared the king.
And we could have a whole conversation about what we already know about the king, and what we think his character is going to be like, and how that might inform how we say that sentence, and try it in lots of different ways. And we might talk about the word declared and think, well, does that give us a clue about how we say it? If you're declaring something, are you angry? Are you explaining? Are you curious? So that would be a really good vocabulary point there. And then we might want to go for a, it says it's an old gardener, so let's try an old sort of voice. "Sire," said the old gardener, "the thief is not a person, but a magnificent bird with feathers of fire." Let's try that one again. "Sire," said the old gardener, "the thief is not a person, but a magnificent bird with feathers of fire." Good. Okay, so what I would like you to do now, that was our choral reading. So you were all speaking together. So now you're going to do some partner or echo reading. One of you is going to try saying one sentence to the next person, and they're going to repeat it back. And feel free to either read the whole piece, bit by bit, or you might want to focus on one part of it and really practice it in different ways. So, sorry if this is excruciating, but it's really good to have a go. Let's all muck in. Have a go, partner, be in the three, and have a practice together. Can't hide, and that everybody gets a chance. We just pick on people. So that's what we're going to do right now. So Mrs. Wheatley, I've got you in my sights. So you and your partner, would you like to choose? Yeah, partners. Would you like to choose one little bit that you were working on? Have a go. Love it. Go for it.
Guards! Someone is stealing my treasured fruit, declared the king.
Who could the culprit be? Sire.
Lovely. Okay, I definitely got some character going on there. How do we feel? What did we find out about the king's character from the way that Mrs. Winkley read that line? Anybody? Angry. I felt like imperious. So I felt, quite bossy in there.
Confident.
Good acting, confident, bossy, used to being obeyed. Fantastic. Who else shall we pick on? Oh, the Macneys at the back there. I can see. Yeah, it's always the ones that are looking down. Right, go for it.
I may be an old man. I thought we were doing old film.
Well,
Don't have to have one.
okay,
Thief is not a person.
Yeah, go for it.
Every night comes swooping down out of the sky.
Lovely, and I've got a really nice lyrical tone there. It's almost like poetry the way you were reading it there, so thank you very much. So you can see that actually you can take one page of text and you can really explore character, you can explore emotion, you can explore narrative possibilities in there. Now I'm not saying that you would do this with every piece of text, But rereading is a really important part of their reading toolbox. And just going back, if something really exciting is happening, go back and reread it. Don't just charge through a book and not get to the end of it. And so not practice reading part of it to build that fluency.
Yes, so as I mentioned before, to get your child where they can be, the best they can be, we do have booster groups in place. And they are looking at spelling, so they might be taking out spelling sessions. They are reading fluency groups, as we mentioned, working on developing their speed, their accuracy and their expression. And there are also comprehension groups that they can be part of, looking at those skills that we looked at with the dogs. Just making sure that we are plugging any gaps that they may have, they're not getting left behind, they are doing the best that they can do. So, moving on to reading at home. Just a few statistics there for you, which are quite interesting. So 45% of 0 to 2s are read daily, or nearly every day. This increases to 58% of 3 to 4-year-olds, partly to get them school ready. And then that drops back down to 44% by the age of 5 to 7. And is that because they're at school? So people think that the majority of the reading is done at school, and therefore it doesn't need to be done at home. But just really interesting to see how it goes up and then drops back down. But it highlights the importance of really still reading with our children at home, picking 10 minutes, wherever you can get them, in the bath, so they can't get out. Strapping them in the car 10 minutes early. Just any snippet of time you can get with them. I know they're busy, they have clubs, they have after school club, I know you guys are busy, but just carving out 10 minutes, maybe it's over breakfast. So as your daughter progresses through Key Stage 2, still important to have those discussions around reading that we were talking about. Don't feel you have to get through a whole chapter. We would rather you read 3 pages and have that quality discussion around what they've read than just plough through a book and they haven't understood anything that they've read. It's also important that they have a chance to listen to you read to them, often a book that's slightly above the level that they are currently reading, just so they're being exposed to the vocabulary that they may not get in their reading books that they're being sent home with. It also gives them a chance to hear how fluent reading is happening. The expression that you're putting in, as we've heard, you've all got some lovely expression and intonation in your reading. Give them the chance to hear that. And then read together, share that reading load, let them read a couple of pages, then you read a couple of pages. It needs to be fun, it needs to be relaxing for them. If it gets onerous, they're not going to enjoy it, they're not going to want to do it. So what should they be reading? Anything, really. A wide variety of genres. I was on car park duty just yesterday and I saw the Week Junior hanging out with one of their rucksacks. Great. Fiction, non-fiction, newspapers, magazines, graphic novels, whatever interests them. And I think that's the key. It's finding a book or a genre that they want to read. And allow them to reread books. Don't be afraid to say, oh, you've read that one a month ago. Let them read it. It helps them practice their intonation, their fluency, especially if they're reading it aloud to you. We have lots of recommendations on the school website as well. If you're not sure where those are, please come and ask. Book lists. If they like Enid Blyton, for example, there are 10 extra try next, which Peter McNeil has put together. Great resource. So please do point them in our direction if you want them to mix it up a little bit, because I know they can get stuck on one word sometimes. If you've got a reluctant reader, someone who doesn't particularly enjoy reading, again, it's about finding a hook. About gymnastics, can we find a book about horses? Is it graphic novels? Do they like reading the more comic style books? We've got all sorts in the library. There's so much. There is a plethora of books for them to choose from. Libraries open every break time, so they are more than welcome to pop in. This Mrs. McNeil is there every break time. Ask her for her advice. There will be something I'm sure we can find. Barrington Stoke have a really good range of books that are more manageable. So they're printed on paper that is slightly off-white. They're less than 100 pages. The chapters are really short, so they can read a manageable chunk. Also, the text isn't justified, because some children struggle with justified text. And the font is carefully chosen to help those children who may struggle a little bit with reading, and that's just a little extract from one of them there.
It's worth mentioning with the Barrington Stoke books that sometimes some of the girls who struggle with reading or are reluctant readers, as they get older, the content of the books that are easier doesn't interest them, because they're for younger children, and actually Barrington Stoke are really good at catering for that. They've got really good stories aimed all the way through to high school, with fantastic content, but without that massive challenge. So we've got a huge range in the library, they've got a huge range up in the support room, and it's a really good way to get those girls reading who are threatened by something that's about that thick, So I'll start off with this quote. You can't build a vocabulary without reading. You can't meet friends if you stay at home by yourself all the time. In the same way, you can't build a vocabulary if you never meet any new words, and to meet them, you must read. We are finding in Key Stage 2 that the girls are increasingly not accessing some of the higher level vocabulary. Children's books today, we're in a golden age of children's literature. The books that are being written are incredible and so enticing for girls, but the language isn't always that complex. Some of the authors that we look at really, really are, but there's a lot of stripping back of language, which in some ways is really good for writing because it gets the story moving, but they're not always accessing that really high-level vocabulary. So, while we're saying it's really important for them to find something they love to read, it's also really important that they access texts which have that vocabulary rich, rich vocabulary in there. So, if your child isn't going to pick up and read one of those books, maybe it's a classic, maybe it's something written which is a bit denser, then audiobooks, or you read to them, or any way that you can choose to get, they read a bit, you read a bit. As they get up to years 5 and 6, it's really important that they start to get that range in there, because the way that society is set up now, children are very used to having things very quickly, immediate gratification. They're not really used to sitting and paying attention to something for as long as they're wanting to access some of these texts. So it's just finding a way that they're still having access to that. We're working really hard in school to do that, so the text that they read within school will have that amazing vocabulary in there. We are working to build that vocabulary. We have our words of the week that they access from all the way through from year 1. So we are constantly plugging in that vocabulary, but the really important thing is they're not going to access it unless you're talking to them about it. So most of the vocabulary they will get is from reading and from discussion. If they're just reading a book on their own, and they see a word they don't know, they will often just skip over it and they'll get it from the context, but they won't necessarily keep that access to it and retain it. Whereas if you're having a conversation about it, then they're going to retain that vocabulary. So that's one of the main reasons, really, why you need to be talking about the books that they're reading. Some of the girls are so good at coming to a word and saying, oh, what does that mean? And talking through what it means, and some of them will just gloss over it, which, to be fair, that's what I would have done. But in those conversations that you have, you can say, oh, right, what does the word sufficient mean? How might you use it in a sentence? And then you'll notice it again next time. Oh, remember, that was in that book that you read. So it's really important that you have those conversations about vocabulary, and that you're having just general conversation with your children around the dinner table, all those sorts of things. That's how they acquire that language. A child who is not at the expected standard in language at the age of 5 is 11 times less likely to be able to achieve the expected level of maths by the age of 11 years. We're talking about reading, we're talking about English, but actually this is the basis for everything. There's so many studies done about well-being, about achievement in maths and science and every subject, and reading is always at the base of it. reading for pleasure, understanding vocabulary, it's always at the base of it. Children with language difficulties at the age of 5 were 4 times more likely to have reading difficulties in adulthood. Children with language difficulties at the age of 5 were 3 times likely to have mental health problems and twice as likely to be unemployed when they reach adulthood, which sounds absolutely like terrifying. So don't worry, we're not all doing the thing, but we're just stating it's not just about whether they enjoy books. It underpins absolutely everything, and enjoying books is just like the cherry on the top of the cake. So, some top tips. Lots of things, lots of ways you can enjoy reading. Reading quality, so it's about 10 minutes of really great reading and discussion, not necessarily, oh right, we need to sit down and get through 5 chapters of your book. Trying to get a variety of genres, especially as they get to years 5 and 6, trying to get that breadth in there. Lots of questions, talk about it, but don't make them feel like they're, in a lesson. Just have a chat. It doesn't have to be, right, let's sit down and do a comprehension. Have a chat, get enthusiastic about the characters and what's happening in the book.
On that point, I would also say, allow them to read a little bit before you interject with the questions, just because then they're getting the flow of the story. Because if you're jumping in every sentence, they're not going to get a gist of what's going on. So maybe you leave your questions until you've read a bit of a chunk, and then have that discussion.
Yeah, and just choose 1 or 2 things to focus on. So have a discussion about it rather than feeling like you have to cover everything every time you read. Making predictions, that's quite an easy one to do because it's a really natural thing to do. Oh my goodness, what do you think is going to happen next? Why do you think that? Summarising, Hannah's already talked about that. They do find it tricky to, and it's one of our learning habits to be able to distill information, and in adult life that's a really, really important skill for everything in life. Asking your child about what they've read, what are they excited about? So they might have a book they're reading with you, they might have a book that they're reading on their own, they might have a book that they're reading at school. Just talk to them about it. What are you getting excited about? Or it's absolutely fine for them to say, oh, I hated that book. That's absolutely fine. Oh, I'm really not enjoying it. Can I try something else? Don't feel like you have to plough through something. We all have books that we start and we're like, actually, that's not working for me. Give it a go, try it out, but if it's not the right book for them, there'll be something else. Discuss reading with family and friends. Show that you're excited about it, even if you're not, just pretend. And I know, lots of us will read loads in the holidays, and then in term time and work time, it's really hard to pick up a book. But if you can model that reading behaviour and how great books are, or magazines, or newspapers, then they're seeing readers in action. Keep it fun as much as possible. Don't make them feel like reading is just another chore. It has to be something they really enjoy doing.
Sorry,
Yeah.
what was the 2010 file 1?
I'll go back.
Previous slide. And point 4.
So sometimes in a lesson, if we're getting to summarise, we would say, okay, I want you to summarise that passage in 20 words, 10 words, 5 words, and then 1 word.
They quite like it as a game, because it's quite hard to do.
And the 1 word is always really telling, like what have they got from that passage?
Yeah.
It's quite interesting.
It is, and they do enjoy it. They wouldn't do it all the time, but it's just another thing, a sort of game you can play with it. So, these are all great things that reading will do. So, it exercises your brain, it gives you better writing skills. They cannot be good writers without reading. They just can't do it, because they take in that language, and if they haven't taken that language, they can't come up with their own. It just doesn't work. So, we always say they need to read more if they want to write one. Reduces stress, it puts you in a good mood, usually. Unless it's a really bad book. A window into another world, so developing that empathy, developing the creativity. Good topic conversation, just something nice to talk about. And helps you learn to concentrate, which, as I say, in this day and age is going to be really, really important. And will set them apart in their study skills from everybody else if they can sustain that attention. And you learn stuff.
Okay, we're going to move on to writing now. So I just want you to have a discussion on your table groups about what is a sentence. Off you go. sentence is.
A collection of words.
Okay, a collection of words. Any other thoughts? Okay, so that is generally what the children will say. They will say it's a group of words. I'm like, I taught you this much yet. Okay, so the way we try and get them to easily remember what a sentence is, because it is tricky, as we've just shown, okay, is the famous type. Okay, so a group of words is not a sentence unless it meets these 5 criteria. It has to have a capital letter at the beginning. It has to have a verb. What is a verb? Let's just make sure we all know what a verb is. An action word or a being word. Was, is. It has to have a subject or a noun. Do you know what a noun is? Yeah, it's a person-based thing. It has to make sense. And it has to have an end mark, punctuation. So it has to have a full stop, a question mark, or an exclamation mark. So yes, it is a group of words, but only if they all do that. Okay, and that is actually a really easy way for the girls to remember what a sentence is. And they're introduced to that in Key Stage 1. So then when I say to them in year 4, what's a sentence, and they say a group of words, I'm like, but we will get there, hopefully. So, in terms of writing, this is what we expect by the end of year 6. They can write for a specific audience and for a purpose. They know why they are writing, and they are tweaking their language choices according to why they're writing. They're using figurative language, they're using those similes, metaphors, personification, and alliteration. They're able to link their ideas using cohesive devices. So how are they linking one paragraph to the next? They're making changes, they're editing their work. They're using a full range of punctuation, including colons, semicolons, hyphens, knowing why they are used, the purpose of them, and trying as hard as they can to apply all the spelling strategies that they have learned across Key Stage 2. Obviously, every child is on their own journey, and this is where we are hoping they will be by the time they leave us and head off to senior school. So, on your tables, this is an example of a grammar activity that we might start the lesson with. We call these retrieval starters. So these are activities that are new to them. So they will know the content, they won't have been taught the content, I should say. And can they retrieve, can they put into practice what they have been taught and show us how much they know. So give it a go, and then we'll go through. Oh yeah, for A, that first line is that first line is one line, it's not 3 lines. So you're only looking for 2 words in A. It's just like 3 lines. unfamiliar to us. Hopefully there wouldn't be any terminology unfamiliar to them, but there's a lot of grammar terminology that they need to know. So, modal verbs, for example, they don't know what a modal verb is, they're going to find it really hard to fill in that box. They could guess, yeah? Just filling a word in the sentence and see if it works. Does anyone know what a modal verb is? Yeah, this table over here does. What's a modal verb?
It tells the frequency, right?
Well, yeah, the degree of possibility, yeah? So the crime scene investigator may find some vital evidence that he could charge the man in custody. A determiner, do we know what a determiner is? It determines the noun, okay? So the tree, not a tree, but the tree over there, specific. And yeah, and 3 plums, because that determines how many noun. And there are obviously some spelling ones on there as well. Adverbs, prepositions, sort of different word classes. I'm not going to go through all of them now, but just gives you a flavour of the type of activities that they would do to start off a lesson. And then we would discuss those, clear up any misconceptions, any misunderstandings, and then take it from there. So, our vision for writing at the Girls Prep is that our pupils will be exposed to a rich variety of texts. We've spoken a lot about that they would be exposed in their reading lessons, and writing styles to inspire creativity. All our pupils will be confident, reflective, and enthusiastic writers who write to express themselves and communicate effectively with others. So we want them to be enthused about writing, we want them to have the will to do it. And we want them to reflect. So they don't just write, but they look back on what they've written. Is it the best they could do? Are they drawing on authors that they enjoy reading? Are they magpieing their ideas and using it in their own writing? So there's nothing harder than supporting young writers to master the concept of transforming their thoughts into well-shaped sentences. So good luck to us all. It's really hard. They can already tell you what they want to write. Getting it on paper is hard for them. A lot of them find it tricky.
A lot of skills to bring together at once.
And the cognitive load. They're thinking about their grammar, they're thinking about their word choices, they're thinking, they've got some great ideas in there. There is a lot going on, and it's breaking it down into those manageable chunks so that they can get that. So just a few statistics: 1 in 3 children and young people aged 8 to 18 said they enjoy writing in their free time, but only 1 in 5 children and young people write something daily for leisure, which has dropped by 25% since 2010. So it's similar to the reading. You need to get writing for pleasure as well as reading for pleasure.
So the process of writing is a cycle, and you can't just write out of nowhere. So it's thinking about what you want to write, and as much as possible we get the children to verbalise what they're going to write. They talk to a friend about it, they tell us their ideas, they do planning, have various ways of planning their writing, finding the way that works for them before they ever get to writing a sentence. So they're not going in cold. Then they have a go at writing it, then the all-important editing, the bit that every child hates. So we have various ways that we tackle this, but it's really important. Now, I'm not suggesting that if they are writing a story at home, they have to edit every word, but they do have to get used to that being part of the process, and we do that all the time at school, because going back to it, improving it, polishing it, thinking about whether it has met its purpose is really, really important, so that they can be proud of what's there at the end. So it is a big part of the process. We have various ways of planning. In Key Stage 1 we use a story mountain, up to Year 3 we use a story mountain, and then we start looking at different story shapes. So right now, live now in the Year 4 classrooms, they are busy writing their first rags to riches story. We've looked at Cinderella, we've looked at different versions of Cinderella, and now they are planning their own version of that story shape. And we introduced various story shapes to sort of build their ideas around. It's all about magpie from other people. So in Year 5, then we look at Man in a Hole, which is where things start great and then they go wrong and then they work out at the end. So these are just some ways that they can start to build their knowledge of stories, especially if they find it tricky. I mean, what we often find is that they want to write a novel. They sit down and they've got so many ideas, and it's just stripping that back. What can you achieve in that time? What is the purpose of it? It's a short story, so how are you going to have that impact? So these give them some chance to do that. So when we're writing non-fiction, one way to look at it is thinking about who is the author, what's the point of the piece of work, who am I writing for, the audience that I'm writing for. Is it a letter? Is it a speech? What form is it going to take? And what's the topic? So it's just really being clear about the point of that writing and making sure that they're always sticking to achieving that goal by the end of it. Lots and lots of ways of crafting writing. And we always say to them, we'd rather you wrote less and crafted it better. Yeah? It's not about writing pages and pages of stream of consciousness writing. It's about really, I'd rather you wrote 4 really, really well thought out sentences. So, deliberately focus on the purpose, showing imagination, especially by the end of Year 6, trying to become a little bit more original. I know in the entrance exam last year there was a question about come up with an original simile, rather than, you know, who ran as fast as a cheetah. They had a picture, they had to come up with an original simile. So it's magpieing, but then having some original thought about things. Choosing your vocabulary for certain effects, and not just vocabulary, but punctuation, sentence length, thinking about the effect on the reader, and choosing particular writing techniques. So that could be figurative language, it could be the length of your sentences, it could be all sorts of things that are crafted together to ensure that it's having the correct effect. And we just said punctuation as well, not just for clarity, but to look at the effect it has on the reader. So especially once you get to that high level punctuation, using ellipses, using hyphens to craft how the reader is experiencing that piece of writing.
So if they're doing any writing at home, allow them to talk through their ideas first. We will never just set them off on a piece of writing. They would have had partner talk, they would have spoken in groups about what they're going to write. They would have had that opportunity to share ideas. So encourage them to share their ideas if they're doing any writing at home. Give them space, don't police what they're writing, let them write, and then go back and have a look at what they've done. Give them a purpose. If they're writing for fun, if they are into animals, can they write to the local dog shelter? Are they reflecting? Are they doing a diary entry? Are you going on holiday? But give them that creative space to do it before you go back and check it, if you are going to go back and check it. And then I think just on that previous slide, when it comes to Year 6, we're trying to get them to have their own writer's voice. So do I know that this is such and such a piece of writing? Do I know this is her writing because she does this? Have they created their own voice? Are they really writing with flair that distinguishes them from someone else? And that's really hard. That is really hard, but that's where we're trying to get some of our Year 6s to get to. So in terms of the mechanics of punctuation that we just touched on, all this will be on MIS, by the way, so we have to be jotting it all down. But this is what we would expect them to know, building on year. Okay, so by Year 6, they're having to know all of that. They would have been exposed to all of that. And can they use that accurately in their writing for effect by Year 6? Okay, you put in a ellipsis. Is it just at the end of your sentence, or have you used it for a pause? Have you used it for a dramatic effect? Do you know why you are using it? And punctuation is a fabulous tool. You can control your reading. You even get to control where they breathe. That's what I call power. Yay. So when you're reading with them, again, draw attention. Why has the author used an exclamation mark? Why have they used an ellipsis? Why have they chosen to use a semicolon or a dash? Discuss that effect of punctuation, because the more they understand that, the more they can then bring it into their own writing.
So, very quickly, because I can see Mr. Staines hovering in the wings back there to do some maths. We said at the beginning, editing is really important. Love this quote from Stephen King up there. It's very difficult for you to look at an entire piece of writing and say, make it better, so it's about breaking it down. In year one, we have, in Key Stage 1, we have various ways of doing this, and in Key Stage 2, we use our editing circles. Have we got a link to that? So when they started writing, we would look through it and we would write in 3 circles how many spelling errors there were, how many punctuation errors there were, and then anything else. It might be grammar, it might be doesn't quite make sense, and the point is to put it back on the girls. So often they know how to do these things, but they're a little bit lazy about looking back because it's hard, yeah? They've finished, they don't want to look at it again. So this is a way of saying, do you know what, we've taught you all these things, we're pushing it back on you. Now this is crafted depending on the girl. If it's somebody who really struggles with spelling, we won't say, right, there's 25 spelling mistakes in there. We'll say, can you go through and find 4 things that you know how to spell? And we will only ever ask them to look for spellings they should already know. So those high frequency words and the words, the spelling patterns they've already looked at in class. So this is a way of saying, this is your job. There's no point me correcting it. I already know how to spell these words. It's your job to go through and find it. And obviously, for some of them, they will be finding it difficult and we'll help them. But it's really important they start to take on that process. And we've made it into a bit of a game. You've got to get your points back. You've got to preserve those points. So that's what we're doing in Key Stage 2, to try and give them the ownership of it.
And then just to finish off, there are many little ways to enlarge your child's world. Love the books is the best of all. So please read with them. They get so much out of reading. They get so much from hearing you read to them. It really impacts upon their writing. And then they can go places. So thank you so much for coming.
So for those that don't know, I'm Joe Staines. I am the maths lead for Girls Prep. I also lead computing as well, and I currently teach 5 and 6 maths, and I'm also helping you 3 days a week as well. So predominantly in Key Stage 2, but I do also teach Year 2 at some point during the week as well. So hope English all went well. No one slipped over on the whiteboard at the back. We'll get started. I know lots of you came last year, which is fantastic. It's nice to see lots of familiar faces back. We're going to have a recap of what I went through last year with the Key Stage 2, and for those that weren't here, you'll obviously get a chance. Do take any pictures if you want to of the screen, not me, please. But the slides will be sent out. They'll be on MIS under the comment section, so they'll be there as well for those worked examples. So first part, like I said, we're going to recap written methods, which we looked at last time in the workshop, and then today we're going to have a look at, because I know it can be a source of anxiety amongst lots of parents, how to teach calculating fractions. And some of the feedback last time was, can we have more about things like fractions, decimals and percentages, not necessarily the written methods that are very similar to the methods that we were taught when we were at school. So we'll have a look at some fraction work as well. The main aim, I just thought we'd start with that for the girls at the Girls Prep, is to make sure that they are confident when they leave the Girls Prep to start their Year 7, whether they go to the senior school here or whether they go elsewhere. And the support that we put in place for those that aren't necessarily so confident, hopefully, and I know there are familiar faces in the room that are very appreciative and have told us that the confidence does increase as they go through the school. And hopefully you will see that if your daughter is not so confident in maths, that the things that we put in place will help her to become more confident in the things that in the methods that she's using and the way that she talks about her maths. So the 4 operations, so we're talking about addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. We'll start with those first. So I'll break it down year by year so you can see what the national curriculum outlines is taught in each year group. Now, we broadly follow this, but sometimes towards the end of the year we may preempt the next year group, or we may not preempt the next year group. It depends on the cohort of girls that we have sitting in front of us. But in year 3 we start with column addition, subtraction up to hundreds, tens and ones, so our place value. We multiply and divide using partitioning, but we also introduce short multiplication as a written method for multiplication in year 3. In year 4, column addition and subtraction stay the same, but it goes up to thousands this time. And we have short multiplication and short division is introduced in year 4. We'll have a look at these in a little bit as well. Year 5 goes up to 6 digits, including decimals for column addition and subtraction. Short division using decimals. You can see there's big emphasis on decimals. They start learning decimals in year 4, so by the time they get to year 5, they are hopefully confident with recognising decimals and using decimals so that we can then calculate with them. And then we've got level multiplication, which is introduced to year 5. And if your daughter's in year 5, we will be starting that imminently this week or next week, so prepare. Year 6, we then move on to column addition and subtraction to millions, including decimals, and we introduce long division, which again, long division is including whole numbers, integers, but also with decimal remainders and fraction remainders, which I will show you this morning as well. So if we look at addition through the key stage, this is what year 3 and 4s look like, very similar to what you would have done at school as well. So being able to add or subtract using a column method. We like to use our place value headings at the top to remind them of what we are actually working with. So for example, it is not 4 add 2, it is in fact 4 tens add 2 tens, which is 6 tens. So adding those, year 3 up to hundreds, tens and ones, and year 4 thousands, hundreds, tens and ones. So that's the only real difference between the year 3 and 4 written methods. And then year 5 and 6 looks a little bit like this, including decimals, up to 3 decimal places as well. Now I've highlighted the 0 in purple because the addition calculation was 26.8 at 4.35. So a real key learning point that they learn in year 5 and 6 is that if they're adding 2 numbers with different decimal places, that they must line those up with the decimal point, and then they can use 0 as a placeholder, so that when they're calculating it, they don't forget about that place being, it has nothing in it. So you can use 0 as our placeholder. So that those are the only real differences between 5 and 6, with the addition of the fact that year 5 and 6 add larger numbers, as well as decimals as well. But the groundwork for decimals is put in year 4. Subtraction again looks a little bit like this. So we talk about exchanging, not borrowing, because we don't borrow, we don't give anything back. So exchanging, we exchange one of those tens for 10 ones. So we move them across, so we're exchanging, a bit like if you exchange money. You give a £10 note, you get 10 £1 coins in return. You never actually borrow the money. So that's why we don't use borrowing, we use exchanging. So if you could use that language at home when you're helping with homework, or if you're doing additional practice, that would be much appreciated, because it is then, and don't worry if you get it wrong, because the girls will say carrying and borrowing, and we just correct them with making sure that they use exchanging. It's a very subtle thing, it doesn't really mean much to them, but we like to use the precise mathematical vocabulary. So again, year 3, hundreds, tens and ones, and year 4 up to thousands. And then year 5 and 6, same again, up to 3 decimal places, including 0 as a placeholder. And this is why we use the 0 in that place, because if you didn't have that there would just be that floating 110 in that ones column over here. So having that 0 as a placeholder means that we can then see that it is 10 ones, now take away 5 ones. So those are the formal written methods for addition and subtraction from years 3 to 6. If we look at multiplication, we start with our times tables, which starts all the way back in year 2. The groundwork again is also put in in EYFS and year 1. It is not taught taught as multiplication necessarily, maybe repeated addition, but that is the groundwork for them being able to recall their times tables. And when we say recall, we mean instantly recall. So not knowing our 5 times tables, like what's 5 times 4, 5, 10, 15, 20, that's not instant recall. That's calculating, that's working it out. Then instant recall, I won't test you today. But you can see here that year 2, they should know their 2s, 5s and 10s. As they move to year 3, they learn their 3s, 4s and 8s. And then year 4, they should be, by the end of year 4, they should know all of their times tables. Now, if your daughter is in year 3 and she currently does not know her 3s, 4s and 8s, this is an end of year target. So they should know those tables by the end of the year. The earlier, the better, is all I will say. If they can learn their times tables earlier, it unlocks so much of the maths curriculum, especially when we get to fractions, which I hope will be highlighted later on. Year 5, they should know all their times tables. Some don't, and we provide additional practice for them. We still keep on top of them, but we do like to push those on that know their times tables to things like multiples and powers. So being able, if we know that 4 times 5 is 20, we can then use our knowledge of 10 times bigger and 10 times bigger to know that we can work out 40 times 50, and then in year 6, going back down to decimals, if I know that 4 times 5 is 20, then I can then work out 0.4 times 50 when I can look at the relationships between the two calculations. And if you look at written methods, short multiplication, which I said we start teaching in year 3, it's set up like this, very similar to column addition and subtraction, and making sure that we're multiplying, using our place headings as well, so hundreds, tens and ones, so we remind the girls that they are not doing, here they are not doing 1 times 4, they are doing 110 times 4. And our answer is not 4 for 110 times 4, our answer is 40 or 4 tens. So being able to use that language throughout the process so that we make sure that they know exactly what they are doing. It's good to have girls that can do the methods, obviously, that's a really important part, but they must understand what they're doing as well. And a lot of the time, if they're taught a procedure and they're not taught why they are doing it, then that can lead to confusion later on, especially when we're looking at things like decimals. Year 5 and 6, we still use short multiplication, of course, when we're timesing by a 1-digit number like timesing by 4. And but this time we look at decimals as well, and larger numbers leading up to hundreds of thousands. What's the most important part of that calculation if we are now multiplying a decimal number by an integer? What's the most important thing to remember? Decimal point. And making sure the decimal point. Can you see my laser? Yeah, perfect. Because some boards you can't actually see. The laser is pointing right there on the decimal point, which should line up with the decimal point that was in your original calculation. Otherwise, they end up with huge numbers, and it's taking them back to number sense. I was just talking to a parent about making sure they have number sense. That looking at an answer and thinking, right, 2.15, I can round that down to 2. 2 times 4 is 8, therefore my answer should be bigger than 8. And I know it should be bigger than 8 and not around about 8, because I've rounded it down, which means I missed out part of the question. So therefore, I know it must be over 8. If they get 860, yes, that is over 8, but it's not a little bit over 8. So having that number sense, making sure they look back at their answer, does that sound right? And that's why we teach rounding, and that's why we teach estimating using rounding throughout the key stage, to make sure they have some kind of number sense about what they are calculating. Year 5 and 6, so it's introduced in year 5, long multiplication, looks something like this. So if we had 213 times 34 this time, we still do 213 times 4. So 3 times 4 is 12, 1 times 4 is 4, add on 1 is 5, and then 2 times 4 is 8. So 213 times 4 is 852. Sometimes, especially when we're learning the method, over on the right-hand side here, we will write the calculation that we are doing. So 213 times 4, and this one is 213 times 30. So that they can see exactly what their answers, or they can see what hopefully their answers will turn out like. If we're multiplying something by 30, it should be a much larger number than if we're multiplying it by 4. So it should be much larger than 852. This 0 here, why do we use that 0? I've highlighted it in purple, it's a really important point. Why do we use that 0?
10 of the 3 tens that are not.
Good, because we're now multiplying, and this is where it can get confusing for them, especially when they learn it for the first time. If we're multiplying 213 by 30, we're going to make it easier for ourselves by multiplying it by 3 tens. And we know that 3 tens are 30. So we're going to use our 0 as a placeholder. So when we do 3 times 3, or 3 times 3 tens, we know our answer is going to be 90, not 9. So making sure that 0 is in there. That is the thing that tricks them out the most. Not using their 0 as a placeholder to show that they are now multiplying by tens and not by the ones like we were doing earlier. So that's long multiplication for years 5 and 6. If we are multiplying a decimal number by something like 34, so I've used the same digits, 21.3 times 34. The way we teach this to make sure that they are accurate and it embeds their other skills of multiplying by 10, 100 and 1,000 is we make sure that this number here is not a decimal. So we're going to make it a whole number. So we're going to multiply it by either 10, 100 or 1,000 in order to make it a whole number. So I'm going to multiply it by 10 to make 213 times 34. I can work that out using long multiplication to make 7,242, but that is not my answer. Now I know it's not my answer because I know it's too big because I multiplied one of them by 10 to start with. So now I need to do the inverse, which was dividing my answer by 10. So now I can divide that by 10 and it will make 724.2. This works with multiplying a decimal by a decimal. I was working with some year 6s this morning on this, looking at something like 4.2 times 0.8. All of them got the answer of 336. And we talked about that if we use our number sense, 4.2 times 0.8, 0.8 is less than 1. Now, if we rounded it to 1, 4.2 times 1 is 4.2. So we know our answer is going to roughly be 4.2. In fact, it should be less than 4.2, due to the fact that 0.8 is less than 1. So then we multiplied it this way instead, which was timesing both numbers by 10. Then they could work out what the answer was going to be. And because they'd multiplied both of our numbers in our calculation by 10, we then had to divide by 10 and divide by 10, or a quick way of dividing by 10 and dividing by 10 is divide by 100. Okay, so dividing by 100 to get back to their answer. And we realised the answer was 3 point something, which sounded more sensible than 300 something. So that is how we multiply our decimals, using our knowledge of multiplying and dividing by 10, 100 and 1,000. And if we look at division, just some general reminders about division. Division facts always go alongside multiplication facts. So we learn them throughout the key stage. They do their times table rockstar sheets 3 times a week, and we make sure that they are learning them alongside. So Monday is always the first session. Different year groups do it on different days. Their first session is always pure multiplication. The second one is pure division, and then the third session is they're mixed up. So they've got both division and multiplication. And if you've ever looked over their shoulder on times table rockstars, or you've had a game on times table rockstars, you'll see that they are mixed up all of the time. And that is to show the relationships between the calculations and to be able to notice that we are using the same numbers in a different order to make 2 different calculations. And inverse is something that they learn right from key stage 1. It may not be in the context of multiplication and division, but it's something that is familiar to them. So learning multiplication and division facts at the same time is super important. When dividing by 10, 100 and 1,000, just like we were on the previous slide, two things that we definitely don't do, so erase them out of your mind, which is just take away zeros. So if you've got, for example, 3.1 divided by 100, there are no zeros to take away, so we can't do that. So we can't say you need to take away the zeros. That is not a generalisation. And we also can't just say move the decimal point, because if they've got 300 divided by 100, there is no decimal point when we write the number 300, unless we write 300.0. So again, just avoid those two things that we were taught at school. Take off the zeros, remove the zeros. We can say it looks like you're removing the zeros if your number is a whole number and is a multiple of 10, 100 or 1,000, but obviously that sounds even more confusing than just saying we move our digits across. So avoid the taking away the zeros and moving the decimal. Decimal points never move. We move the digits 1, 2 or 3 places depending on whether we are timesing or dividing by 10, 100 or 1,000. So yeah, that's some little things about division before we look at the written methods. Short division looks like this. Some people like to call it bus stop. We call it short division. The national curriculum calls it short division. If we're all consistent, then they won't get confused. I don't know what bus stops have to do with maths either. I also don't know what crocodiles have to do with maths, like crocodile eats the bigger number, crocodiles don't eat numbers, crocodiles don't exist in our maths lessons, so let's not talk about crocodiles, let's not talk about bus stops. Short division, if you want the term for what it's just called a division bracket, we used to call it as a division bracket. So you draw your division bracket in your calculation, and then you can calculate using short division, not bus stop method. So that's what we teach in year 4 with whole numbers, integers, and then in year 5, and obviously 6 as well, it's progressive. We look at leaving our short division as remainders, as whole remainders, so if there's 1 left, we can put remainder 1, or we can leave it as a fraction as well. And the way that we get to 59 1/4 is we know that there's 1 left, and we divided the whole by 4. Therefore, it is 59 1/4. So that is year 5. Year 6, like I said, we learn that as well, but we also make sure that we are using decimal numbers as well, and also whole numbers that create decimals. So here we have 237 divided by 4, adding our decimal point, and we normally say to add on 2 zeros at the end as our placeholders. And if they question why, well, there's nothing in those places, and if there's nothing in that place, we can put a 0. A bit like when we had addition and subtraction at the very beginning, we can use 0 as our placeholder. And then that 1 remainder is brought over here. So now we have 10 tenths divided by 4, which leaves us with 2 tenths, plus we've got 2 more tenths as a remainder, which means we move them across into our hundredths column, and now we've got 20 hundredths. And we can divide 20 hundredths by 4 to get to 5 hundredths. A lot of mathematical language when we're explaining these. And long division, everyone's favourite. The groans of year 6 when we say we're doing long division. We do sometimes teach it at the end of year 5 as well, depending on time and depending on the cohort. Dividing a number by a 2-digit number, you can do a short division as well, so you could do it like this, absolutely fine. But when we've got large numbers and we're taking away things like 252 or having 255, we need some kind of help, and writing those calculations down, writing everything that's in our head in short division into long division means that they can be a little more accurate when dividing large numbers. Now for some, writing out their number facts of their 36 times tables can be a little bit too much. So what we do is we look at what 1 times 36 is, because we're dividing by 36. We double it, so we know what 36 times 2 is. We double it again, so we know what it times 4 is. And we double it again to work out what times 8 is. So that's quite helpful, because now we can start filling in the rest. So if we're timesing 36 by 3, there's lots of different ways that we could do it, but using what we've got on the board, we could add 36 and 72 together to make times 3, or we could add 36 to 72, or we could subtract 36 from 144 to work out the rest. So then we do our 10s and 5s first, and then we've got our 3s, double it to make our 6s, and then the last two are the 7s and 9s, which don't quite fit. What are the two ways, or what are the different ways that we could work out what 36 times 9 is? You can shout that. Good, 36 times 10 take away 36. Another way? Add 36 to 288. Which one's easier? 360 take away 36, or 288 add 36? Okay, is there another way that we can do it? Good, so triple 108. Lots of people call the times 3 the key, because it can unlock times 6 and unlock times 9 as well. So tripling 108 to get that. Which one's easier? Tripling 108, adding 36, or subtracting 36? Probably tripling 108 in this instance. Not always the case, but in this case, you've used your number sense to think which one is going to be easier, which one is going to be more accurate for me. So we've got our rest of ours, which are times 7 and times 9, which we can do different ways. This may be far too much going on, because before they've even started their long division, they've got to work that out. In which case we simplify it to literally 2, 4 and 8. And you can hopefully use those to help you. And if another one comes up, or it doesn't actually go, it needs to go in 3 times, then they can work out 36 from 72, adding to 72, for example. Absolutely, yeah, so you can partition. So when we're talking about doubling, if we're doubling 36, we can double 30 to make 60. We can double 6 to make 12, add the 2 together to make 72. We do use number lines, but not necessarily for written methods. We use number lines more for things like negative numbers, looking at negative numbers, fractions, decimals on number lines. So we do use number lines throughout Key Stage 2. A lot of them think it's Key Stage 1 only, but we do use them throughout lots of different topics. So that's long division and all of the written methods. Any questions about written methods before we move on to the main event, the most exciting? Yes, 2 at the back.
Can you just go back and actually go through that? Can you just explain how you do that?
How we do the long division? Right, everyone get a piece of paper and a pen. 9,759 divided by 36. You can thank your man. No, you can't use calculators either. Calculators are very bad. Okay, right. Hopefully you've set it out in your bracket. Right, let's do this together. Hands up if you can't be brave. Everybody else, the girls, can be brave. Hands up if you are not confident at doing long division. And you waited for him at the back. 2 hours. Well done. Okay, right. Thank you for being brave. Let's go through this. We've got 9,759 divided by 36. You don't need to write your fact boxes because I've got them on the board as well. So you can use mine. I've saved you a step. You've also got the answer. So if you at the end you don't still get that answer, just copy the answer. So the first thing we do is looking at 36. This is much harder without a whiteboard. So hopefully you can follow along. 36 into 9. Okay, so 9 divided by 36 doesn't go. So we can put a 0 on the top, which is helpful. And then we look at 36 into 97. So look at our fact box. How many times does 36 go into 97? Well, 3 times is too many, so it must be twice. So I'm going to put a 2 at the top here, because it goes in twice. Now, what is 2 times 36? 72. So write it underneath your 97 and subtract 72 from 97. And it should leave you with a remainder of 25. The next step that we do, we've got our remainder of 25, is we pull down our next one, our next digit. Now the reason why we do that, because normally in short division we'd write the remainder at the top above it, but we're not going to do that because otherwise we're working down, we're working up. So we're just going to pull the next one down. So now we're trying to do 36 into 255, or 255 divided by 36. Can you see why we're doing long division and not short division for this one? Because there are large numbers in our head that we're not going to be able to hold very easily. So how many times does 36 go into 255? Well, 7 times is very close, 252. So we write our 7 times at the top, it goes in 7 times. We write what 7 times 36 is, which is 252. And then we subtract it from there to find what the remainder is ready for the next one. So you should have a remainder of 3, and you can do that mentally. And then the last thing we do is pull down our next digit, which is our 9. 36. Am I going too fast? 36 into 39 goes once, so I write my 1 at the top. I take away my 36, because 36 times 1 is 36, and I'm left a remainder of 3. Now, there are no other digits after this, so I know that I've got 3 left over, which I can leave as remainder 3, or I can leave as 336, which could be simplified down as well. Or, if we're feeling fancy, we could put our decimal point, 0, 0, like I showed you earlier, a short multiplication, short division, sorry, and then we could work it out what it would be as a decimal number. We do teach the girls that if you're trying to work out as a decimal remainder and it just keeps on going and going and going, we normally say do it to 3 decimal places, stop, and round it to 2 decimal places. Because not often do we use thousands in every day. So if we're thinking about money, it always goes down to hundreds. 1/100th of a pound is a penny. So that's why we get them to kind of go to 3 decimal places and round back up to 2 decimal places. Is that good? Did you have a question? Yes. Let's come back together. We've just got one more question, and then we're going to move on to practice. Yeah. So the language that we use, the question was about multiplying and dividing by 10, 100 and 1,000. What language do we use? So if I went back there, if we had, for example, 3.1 divided by 100. We know that we've got to move it 2 places because we've got 2 placeholders on 100. So we're going to be moving it 2 places. Now if we are dividing, our number is getting smaller. And if we think about a place value chart, numbers going this way are getting larger because we're heading towards thousands and millions. And the place value headings going to the right are getting smaller because we're going tenths, hundreds, thousands, they're getting smaller in value. So therefore we know that if we're dividing, we move them to the right because our places are getting smaller, so our number will get smaller. And if we are multiplying it, our number, if it's multiplying by an integer, to be really careful with this. If we're multiplying by an integer, the number will always get larger. So that's the language that we use. If it's 1,000, if multiplying or dividing by 1,000, we know it has 3 placeholders because it's got 3 zeros on the end. Therefore, we're going to move it 3 times to the right or 3 times to the left. And again, it's that number sense of, right, you're multiplying it by 100, therefore, should your number be getting larger or should your number be getting smaller? If it gets smaller, you've moved it the wrong way. You've made a mistake somewhere, but most commonly, you've moved it the wrong way. You've moved it whichever way. Okay? Does that help? Perfect. Okay, fractions. I'm going to take you through calculating fractions. So addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. They come in that order as well. So if you need to duck out, if your daughter is in year 3 and 4, and you need to duck out, the addition, subtraction, year 3 and 4 ones will come at the beginning. We start with pictorial methods, so using pictures to help us explain fractions. The question that I've got on the board is 3 6 add on 2 6, and I can notice here that the denominators, the 6's, are the same. We will display fractions like this, like a computer shows them. We will also display them one above the other as well, because it's important that they see both, because in different practices they will see different ways of showing it. So we've got 3 6 add on 2 6. Now I've drawn my bar, and it has 6 equal parts. That's a really important starting point. I draw my bar and I've got 6 equal parts. When you draw it on your piece of paper, or your daughter draws it, they don't have to be equal parts. Otherwise they're going to need to always use squared paper, or they're going to need to measure with a ruler. So that's not, although it's an important part in the representation, how they draw it isn't wholly necessary. So we divided it into our 6 equal parts. We started with 3 of these, so 3 6. So I can highlight my 3 6 here, and some of you instantly are thinking that that's a half. And then I'm adding on another 2 6. Now I don't need to draw another bar because I've got space in my bar already that I can add 2 more 6 to it. So I'm going to add 2 more 6 to my bar, and I end up with 5 6. Do I have a whole one yet? Is my number over 1 or under 1? Under 1. And we know that it's under 1 because my bar is not full yet. There is one more space, there is one more 6 that I could add before I get to a whole. So I know my number is less than a whole, and therefore it is a fraction which is less than 1. So that's adding fractions with the same denominators. Subtracting fractions, again, is the same method. So if we had 5 6 and we were taking away 2 6, I would just cross through those 2 to show that I now only have 3 6 less. You can do it with counters, which is quite nice. You can physically remove the counters. They can remove those 2 6. Subtraction is not always about removing things, but here we can say that we're taking away 2 of those 6, so get rid of them, and I'm left with 3 6 left in my bar. As we move to year 4, same thing, but this time the only subtle difference is that we are adding fractions over a whole. So in year 3 we were looking at fractions, adding fractions within the whole. Now we're adding fractions over the whole. So same again, I've got my 5 6, and I'm going to be adding 2 6. What's the problem with my representation at the moment? If I'm adding on 2 more 6, what's the problem? Yeah, so I don't have 2 6. I don't have space for 2 6. So I need to draw another bar, which is empty. Actually means nothing at the moment. It's just a representation. It's 0 6. And now, do I have space for 2 more 6? Yeah. First one I'm going to add is on the end, so that I've got one complete hole there, or 6 6. And then I can add my other one in my next bar. So now, altogether, I have 7 6, or as we move towards year 4 and 5, converting to mixed numbers, I know that I've got 1 whole and 1 6. So hopefully you can see that that pictorial method is a really clear way of showing and also preempting in later years the conversions between mixed numbers and proper fractions or improper fractions. So year 3, let's just recap. Year 3 was staying within the whole. Year 4 we look at adding over the whole, in which case we need more than one representation, more than one part. As we move to Year 5, we now have an additional problem, which is our denominators are not the same. However, they are multiples of, one is a multiple of another and one is a factor of another. So we call them like denominators. And they're related, or related denominators. So like denominators or related denominators. Because I know that 6, if I was to double it, it would make 12. Or if I was to halve 12, it would make 6. Which is super helpful when we are looking at adding two fractions with different denominators. So if I wanted to make them all 12ths, because we've got to make the denominators the same, I'm going to make them all 12ths. You can go down to make both of them 6ths in this example, but not all examples will be able to do that. We tend to generally teach them from the start that we make both fractions with the larger denominator of 12ths. So I've divided my picture, you can have a look at it again, I've got my 4 6ths. I've now divided it into 12ths, and I have 8 12ths. And now I can add on 2 more 12ths. So how many 12ths do I have altogether? 10 12ths, or, for some people, if we were to take that line away, if we were to simplify it, if that's what we're asking them to do, we don't always ask them to simplify it, you can still see the 6, and we know that we've got 5 6ths in our bar there. Okay, so that's one way of doing it pictorially. We then move on to doing this abstractly without the pictorial representations. So again, we've got 4 6ths, this time adding on 1 12th, slightly different. We're going to convert 4 6ths into 12ths, so I put a little line through it to show that we're now not going to use that fraction, we're going to use a new one. How do we get from 6 to 12? Multiply it by 2. So we multiply it by 2, drawing our arrows, really important, because it comes up in all sorts of topics later on in Year 5 and 6, like ratio and proportion. Drawing our arrows, multiplying it 2 to get to 12ths, and then from 4, multiplying it by 2, we must do the same to the numerator as we do to the denominator. Avoid saying do the same to the top as you do to the bottom, because we don't use top and bottom, and we don't use things like top-heavy fractions anymore. We use numerators and denominators, and top-heavy fractions are called improper fractions. So now we've got 8 12ths. 8 12ths is equal to 4 6ths. Yeah, they both represent the same amount. They're not the same fraction, but they are the same amount. So now we've got 8 12ths adding on 1 12th, which would make 9 12ths. So it makes it easy to go back to Year 3, where we can add 2 fractions with the same denominator. So that's doing it abstractly. I'm going to go through these, and then I do have a slide if we have time at the end for you to have a little practice of these, like we did with the long division. Yes.
So when you get the answer 9 12, there is the expectation that the girls should use that those fraction forms as well.
Good. The question was, should they simplify it down? If the answer is 9 12, should they simplify it down? Depends what the question asks. Yeah, depends what the question asks. If we, and sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. If they're just learning it for the first time, we absolutely won't get them to simplify it, because it's another part to the process which could overload a lot of the girls cognitively if they've then got to simplify it down. And also that actually marking the answer wrong because they haven't simplified it. But the answer is right if we haven't asked them to simplify it. But they do get, as they move through 5 and 6, especially Year 6, they will be expected to simplify down pretty much all the time. Unless a topic is new, or unless we're doing something new, we won't get them to simplify straight away, but otherwise we would expect them to simplify down from 9 to 12. Which again, they use the same arrows, which they would have done all the way back from Year 4, where they're looking at equivalent fractions. So it's nice and easy between those. Multiplying fractions, so we're moving towards Year 5 and 6 content now. Probably scares the life out of some of you looking at that. The original calculation is 2 6ths times 2. I've taken my knowledge all the way back to Year 1, which is multiplication as repeated addition. But what I mean by repeated addition is if I've got 2 sits times 2, I know I've got 2 lots of 2 sits, so I've got 2 sits and another 2 sits. And that will help me because I already know how to add and subtract fractions with the same denominator and fractions with different denominators. So now I can use 2 sits and 2 sits to help me. So I've got 2 sits and I've got another lot of 2 sits. So in total I've got 4 sits. Simplify that down if we need to. So that's multiplying fractions pictorially. But hopefully what the girls will spot, and we do ask them to spot because we talk about maths, is a lot of noticing, making sure you're spotting patterns. If we look at our numerator, and we look at our denominator, and we look at what we're multiplying it by, when we look at our answer of 4 sixths, what stays the same? The denominator. What changes? The numerator. So we can generalise that when we are multiplying a fraction by an integer, for example 2, we can generalise that the denominator always stays the same and you're just multiplying the numerator. So here, that suddenly speeds us up. 2 times 2 is 4 and our denominator stays the same, so it's 4 sixths. Our next one is ramping up, as you can see. Our next one is where in Year 5 and 6 we look at being able to add and subtract fractions with different denominators, which is the same as what they learn in Year 5, but this time, what do you notice about our denominators, which was different to last time? Yeah, they're not related. They are, they're different. They're unlike denominators. They're not related denominators. So we then employ something, and this may send shivers down your spine from your schooling, the lowest common multiple, or LCM. So if you've got a piece of paper, can you help me work out the lowest common multiple between these two numbers? So can you draw a little, like a little tally grid with 4 on the top and 5 on the other side? And underneath, can you write the first 3 multiples of each number? So under your 4, you should have 4, then you should have 8, then you should have 12. And then on your other side, on your 5, start with 5, 10, and 15. Is there a common multiple between those 2 sets of lists at the moment? No. So now we need to keep going. So let's add 1 or 2 more on each side, and hopefully we'll find a common multiple, and the common multiple is 20. Now some of you are thinking, yeah, you just times 5 by 4 to make 20. You can do in this example, but you can't do it in all examples, especially when you're thinking about fractions with large denominators. Then you can find much lower multiples, and it may just be multiplying 1 by 3 and 1 by 2 to get there, rather than coming up with a denominator that's like 4,952, and then you've got to somehow be able to simplify that back down. So don't teach them, you just do 5 times 4, and that will be the lowest common multiple. That is a multiple, and in this instance it is the lowest common multiple, but it's not how we find the lowest common multiple. We use our lists to find out the lowest common multiple. And if they know their times tables, they'll probably know that instantly. I know the first table that comes up in both the 4s and the 5s, which are common, which is 20. So we're going to convert them both to 20th, the same as I did before. So multiplying this one now by 4 to get from 5 to 20. And then I must do the same to the numerator. 2 times 4 is 8. So the first fraction is 8 20ths, if we're working them both in 20ths. And the other fraction, 1/4, we have to multiply 4 by 5 to get to 20, so therefore we multiply our numerator by 5 to get to 5. Now I've got my 2 fractions with the same denominator. Now it's super easy to add them together or subtract them depending on what you're doing to work out the answer. Simplify if needed. So that's when we have denominators that are not related. Mixed numbers, exactly the same, but the only step you need to add in is converting 1 4/6 into an improper fraction, and then you can convert them so they've got the same denominators. So 10/6 Now I can convert that to 12ths, timesing by 2, so now 20 12ths add 1/12. Multiplying pairs of fractions, so 1/2 times 2/6. This is the lazy one, the easy one. It looks the most complicated, but once you've taught it, they can spot the relationship between them. I'm going to change times to of, so 1/2 of 2/6, because of and times are the same. And if I was to halve my 2/6, I'll show you again, if I halve my 2/6, I end up with 2/12. So that helps me, because now I can realise that you can just do 1 times 2 is 2, and 2 times 6 is 12. So yes, we teach it pictorially first, but we move them towards more efficient methods, which is knowing that I just need to multiply my numerators together and just need to multiply my denominators together without having to convert them. That's why I call it the lazy one, because they don't need to convert it like all of the others. So that's a nice one to learn. And when they start the lesson, they are overwhelmed by the fact they've got to multiply a fraction by a fraction, but once they have learnt, I suppose, the trick, once they've seen how it actually works, then they understand that it's actually the easiest one to do out of all of them. And then dividing a fraction. Dividing a fraction by an integer is what we tackled in year 6. We've got 2/6 divided by 2 at the moment. Pictorially, it could look like this: 2/6 divided by 2. Well, what's that the same as? Multiplying by, multiplying by 1/2. Okay, so we've got dividing it by 2. But what we can do, instead of them having to draw out a picture each time, is speed them up by using keep, flip, change, KFC, as a little way. Some schools use it as KCF, keep, change, flip, which is more logical, but to help them remember it, KFC, obviously, it speaks for itself, doesn't it? I always like it when I say, right, where do you buy your chicken from? Let's go, Waitrose. KFC. So, KFC, even one of our year 6s this morning says, how do we divide a fraction? And she said, we get our chicken from KFC. Yes, we do, not Waitrose. Right, KFC, so keep, flip, change. Keep the first one, flip the second one, change the operation. So this is what it looks like. We've got 2/6 divided by 2. Now, I know that 2 is the same as 2 over 1, because we've got 2 divided by 1 is still 2. So I've converted that to a fraction already. So I've got 2/6 divided by 2, or 2 over 1. I'm going to keep the first one, which is 2/6, and I'm going to flip my second fraction. So now it's gone from 2 over 1 to 1 over 2, or a half. And then the last thing to do is change this to a multiplication calculation. Now the reason why we do that is because it is much more friendly to be able to do multiplication than it is to do division. If you think about your daughters learning their times tables, when you say something like 80 divided by, well, let's do 64 divided by 8, they don't sit there and work out how many times 8 goes into it. They flip it around and go, what do I times by 8 to get to 64? And this is basically what we're doing here with the fractions. We're changing it into a multiplication calculation instead of doing a division calculation, because multiplication tends to be easier. So then you just multiply them together, which we know how to do because we did it just there. So KFC. Where do you buy your chicken? I'm going to skip this because I know English overran. We didn't start until 25:2. I did just do the last 2 things, and then you can have some time to kind of ponder out in here or out there. Two things that we use in lower key stage 2, in year 3 and 4, are mathematics and times table rock stars. They do use mathematics, they don't use it all the time. It is a good resource for lots of parents, as they have good visuals on there, and it's a nice easy way for them to engage in their homework. Their children like it because it's obviously digital, so therefore it's more encouraging for them to do their homework, but not always is mathematics. Timetable rock stars is part of their weekly homework, which they must be doing 25 minutes a week on. If they do it 5 times a week for 5 minutes, they get a sticker, but otherwise that is part of their homework. And then in year 5 and 6 we use different programs like Dr. Frost, and we use Atom Learning for parents who sign up to both as well, and you can have parent accounts as well. And Dr. Frost, just for those that don't know, has all of the curriculum from primary, secondary and A-levels. If you've got older children, it's a great free resource. It's made by a teacher who used to work with different boys, Jamie Frost, and he has all the content on there for up to GCSE level as well. So that's a really good resource that you can sign up to for free. And then Atom Learning is one that we use throughout the school as well, not just in maths but in science and in English as well, as we gear them towards their entrance papers in year 6. And the only other website that I wanted to highlight is White Rose. Lots of parents I know have signed up to White Rose. You can sign up to the parent part, and it's got different ways, lots of different topics, and it uses like the same methods that we use in class as well. So that's a really good website, White Rose, if you're not already signed up. But thank you very much for coming. Sorry it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. If you have any questions, I'm here for the next 5 or 10 minutes, and then you can leave. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming.